Hey everybody, thanks for joining me again for the Week 2 Fantasy Football Databank. I'm your host, Bobby Lamarco, the Fantasy Football X Factor. So let's just dive right into it. Of course, on this Databank episode, we're going to talk about each matchup for the week. It's places where last week was exploited by another team, so we'll talk a little bit about that. A couple things I want to talk about first. Go check out my shadow coverage report on football.rasball.com. That episode is a great article about shadow coverage and which top wide receivers are going to face tough cornerback matchups this week. Could be big for fantasy, start sits questions, and tiebreakers for you. Also, I write on expandtheboxscore.com my opportunity analysis for week 2. I dive into all my volume projections for all the players from 2020, and I talk a little bit about which teams had the highest volume last week that could come down, could really impact fantasy players, so check that out as well. So let's get right into it. So the first game we're going to talk about is the Giants versus the Bears. Obviously, last week we talked about when the Giants faced the Steelers. Not a great start. Obviously, some garbage time for Darius Slayton, scoring 2 receptions, 22 yards, and a touchdown on the final drive. Really boosted his day. Now, obviously the Steelers, very good defense, so it's hard to fault Daniel Jones. But Saquon Barkley could not get anything on the ground done. He had negative yards. That's going to change completely this week. The Bears allowed Adrian Peterson almost to get to 100 yards, so obviously there's going to be more success on the ground. I think the biggest thing for the Giants' skill position players is Golden Tate going to play. He did get a limited practice in on Friday, so that's something to watch. Overall, I'm not excited to start Darius Slayton this week, as we saw Marvin Jones struggle versus the outside corners last week. And I think the guy that really exploited that defense was Danny Amendola. So I think that's good news for a guy like Sterling Shepard, who plays primarily in the slot now. I think Golden Tate will play outside next to Darius Slayton. So I think I'm really targeting Sterling Shepard in this matchup. As for Evan Ingram, so obviously last week TJ Hawkinson had some success versus the Chicago Bears. 5 receptions and a touchdown. So I think you keep rolling with Evan Ingram. He did lead the team in routes last week, so that's good news. Now on the flip side, let's talk quickly about the Chicago Bears. Now the Steelers were able to exploit the Giants secondary last week. So I think from a Mitch Trubisky standpoint, I know there's a lot of excitement. He had a big second half, but he was 8 for 20 in the first half. Then the Lions lost 3 starters in the secondary, and then he went off. I'm not saying the Giants are an intimidating standpoint defense, but at the same time, when you're going down 3 starting corners, obviously you should do well. But where the Giants were exploited was the slot. Juju had a big game, 2 touchdowns in that matchup. I think Anthony Miller, even though he's not getting the full allotment of routes just yet, actually, none of the receivers behind Allen Robinson really are getting a lot of routes. Jimmy Graham was second on the team in routes for the week, so that is a little alarming that Anthony Miller has not separated himself from the pack too much. But I think he does have a decent game in this game versus the Giants, who have been very vulnerable against slot corners. According to Football Outsiders, they did say that the Giants were one of the worst teams versus the slot, so that's just something that's worth noting. Now, Jimmy Graham, I'm probably not excited to start him, but he is a name to monitor. He did score in the red zone last week. He did lead the team in red zone targets. So what that means is he's someone to monitor. He could be the primary red zone weapon for the Chicago Bears. He did run the second most routes on the team. As for David Montgomery, I'm buying David Montgomery this week. I think he's a great start. We saw what Benny Snell did with a banged-up offensive line last week versus this Giants defense. I think you play David Montgomery with confidence. He got a decent amount of touches last week, so David Montgomery's a play. Allen Robinson, now he might see a lot of James Bradbury, but I wrote in my article he is a must-start player. Robinson plays almost nearly half of his snaps in the slot, so they do a great job getting him away from shadow corners. So I think Allen Robinson's a good play this week from that side. So Bears, I am buying Allen Robinson. Anthony Miller is on the flex radar, and start David Montgomery. As for Tariq Cohen, I need to see it again. We haven't seen it nearly in 2 years now, well, a year and a half now, that he was actually productive. I need to see Tariq Cohen's role, that he's going to get you double-digit touches and be productive with them. So last week, he was kind of almost a handcuff. He ran 4 more routes than David Montgomery last week, so he's not even like the clear running passing game back. Only 4 more routes is nothing crazy to think about, so I think Tariq Cohen needs to be on your benches for now. I'm not really excited to roll him out until I see him do it consistently once again. Next game we're going to talk about is the Rams versus the Eagles. And the big thing with the Rams offense, now let's look at this. So the Eagles secondary is much improved. We saw last week that the Eagles defense still lost the game, but they held Haskins to under 200 yards, and the run game didn't even get to 100. So there was nothing really that was great against the Eagles. Now, of course, the Goff and company playing at home. You got to love Goff at home. I do like that. But the thing is, this is not a doormat secondary anymore. Darius Slay is the real deal. Roby Coleman in the slot is also good as well. So this secondary has been beefed up. This isn't a cakewalk matchup. You're obviously still going to start Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp, but I would fade them in DFS fantasy. I don't think they have big games, but I think they're both going to be productive from a season-long standpoint. Tyler Higbee, listen, Joe Everett got hurt in the second half of that game. I'm a little concerned. They were kind of splitting work in the beginning in the first half. Then Everett got hurt in his back. Now he's playing this week. He looks to be healthy. I need to see Higbee do it with a big game. He didn't have a big game last week, so I need to see Higbee do it. Now, the running backs for this team, if you're looking at it for Malcolm Brown versus Cam Akers, the Eagles' front is daunting. They have a dominant run defense, much better than the Dallas Cowboys. I'm not overly excited to start Cam Akers. I'm probably putting him on my bench. Malcolm Brown's going to be good for a touchdown. I mean, listen, that's just how it is, man. I can tell you right now, he's probably the best bet on the game to score in this game. So I think I'm rolling with Malcolm Brown because he's a good bet to score in this matchup. Now on the Eagles side, listen, the Rams did a pretty good job overall versus the Dallas Cowboys. Pretty potent offense. But like I talked in the offseason, there was going to be a little bit of a learning curve for the Cowboys with Mike McCarthy. There's a new playbook there. People will not talk about it that much, so they did slow down that offense pretty well in that game. So the Eagles, the good thing for them, they get Miles Sanders and Lane Johnson back. So that's huge news for them. I think that's great news for Carson Wentz. I think that's good news for Deshaun Jackson. So we saw Jalen Ramsey. He didn't shadow Amari Cooper last week, and he did get beat a couple times. If it wasn't for that questionable PI call, who knows how big of a game Gallup would have had. So Cooper had 10 catches. That was a big game for him. Only 80 yards, but still from a PPR standpoint. So I'm actually thinking Deshaun Jackson might be a post-hype sleeper here after a dud week 1, playing limited snaps. So, that's someone to look at. Obviously, I think Deshaun Jackson could beat like a guy like Jalen Ramsey deep for at least one touchdown, one deep play. So I think Deshaun Jackson might be still on the wide receiver 3 radar. I think Miles Sanders is going to smash in this game. I'm very excited to see him. Actually, he's one of my favorite player props. He's actually very low. 3.5 receptions is not great, but the 21.5 receiving yards, great player prop. I'm betting the over on Miles Sanders' receiving game because the Rams had a lot of change in their linebacking core. They lost Corey Littleton this offseason. So, I think Zeke last week showed that you can catch some passes, get some yards versus these linebackers. I think Miles Sanders has a good game in the passing game and overall as well, so he's a must-fire start. Carson Wentz, to be honest with you, this isn't the best matchup for him either. Lane Johnson coming back is huge. I think he has a much better game, much more efficient game than he did against the Washington Redskins. But Dallas Goedert, listen, until we see otherwise, keep playing the guy. The Rams' defense against tight ends is nothing special. Obviously, they can be beat. Last year, they were one of the worst defenses against the tight end. There's nothing really this offseason that says anything's going to be different. They brought in a new defensive coordinator, so I think he's the former linebackers coach for the Broncos, Vic Fangio guy. So he was a Vic Fangio guy for years. So the defense is a little different than what it was under Wade Phillips, but I think you're going to keep rolling with Goddard until Alshon gets healthy, until Jalen Reagor shows rapport with Carson Wentz. I think you got to keep playing both those tight ends. You got to expect Ertz to bounce back. He did lead the team in routes last week. Now let's jump down to the next game. Falcons versus the Cowboys. This should be fireworks. I'm pretty excited. Listen, last week let's talk about the Falcons first. Falcons faced against the Seattle Seahawks. That game was just blow-up potential, and it was awesome across the board. I think this game could just be it again. I don't think you overthink this one from a fantasy standpoint. You play everybody in this game as much as you can. But let's look at how the Rams attacked the Cowboys. So from that standpoint, we saw, Robert Woods was the main beneficiary on the outside. He was the bigger play. Cooper Kupp and him actually split work inside and out, so it was interesting. But overall, the Rams offense didn't blow up or anything against the Cowboys. They actually were held kind of in check. So I'm expecting this game not to be as productive as the Seahawks-Falcons games were, but it's still going to be very good from a fantasy standpoint. I think you look at the guys on the outside, you obviously like Calvin Ridley and Julio in this matchup. The Cowboys just don't have the corners to keep up with them. Russell Gage versus Hayden Hurst. I was a big Hayden Hurst guy. Listen, I talked last week, if you watched this, I talked about how Hayden Hurst is a very tough matchup against Seattle's new safeties. This week, it's going to be a lot easier. He's going to have a much more productive day, and I think that's going to affect Russell Gage a little bit because we saw Cooper Kupp, who is the quote-unquote technical primary slot guys struggle a little bit against this Dallas Cowboys defense. So I think maybe Russell Gage comes down to earth just a little bit. I think Hayden Hurst and him kind of move in the same, more to the middle of those two in those production standpoints. So I'm keeping the faith with Hayden Hurst. I think Russell Gage is probably on your PPR radar for a nice solid wide receiver 3 week in that format. As for the running back, Todd Gurley, I think he's going to have more of a productive day. We saw, obviously, the Rams last week with Malcolm Brown and Cam Akers both had success a little bit on the ground versus this defense. So I think Todd Gurley, obviously you drafted him, so really you're not going to sit him. So if he's on your team, the matchup's okay. I think you're going to be all right. I think we saw last week the Rams running backs were productive versus this Cowboys defense. So keep rolling there. On the flip side for the Cowboys versus the Falcons, I mean, fire them up. Just fire him up. You know, I'm super stoked. I think across the board, don't even overthink it. I think the Blake Jarwin injury is huge news for Gallup and CeeDee Lamb. You're going to see more volume now because their backup tight end is not going to have the same expectation for targets that a guy like Blake Jarwin would. So I think that's bigger news. I think Lamb... I think Lamb is now more of a productive wide receiver 3. I think in this specific matchup, though, I'm more excited about Gallup and Cooper because because DK Metcalf had a big week on the outside. Also, I mean, Tyler Lockett. So I think pretty much across the board, all 3 of these wide receivers are playable, but I'm really looking forward to seeing Gallup and Cooper. Cooper's probably one of my favorite DFS plays on the week at home. All right. As for so for the running back, do you want me to talk about Zeke? Okay, yeah, let's move on. So the Panthers versus the Bucs. So really, when I talk about this game, let's talk about the Panthers' offense. I think DJ Moore was a little concerning last week. We saw Robbie Anderson break away for a long touchdown, but if you take away that one catch for 75 yards and a touchdown, his day is not that great. It's okay. I mean, listen, it seems like him and DJ Moore are the 1A, 1B. And this is one of my concerns about DJ Moore. In my article I wrote about him in the offseason was that we don't know. Teddy Bridgewater has never been a volume passer. He's not been able to support multiple pass catchers for a sustained period of time. So this is one of my big concerns is if DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson are more of a 1A, 1B instead of a clear 1, DJ Moore is going to be overpriced in his 3rd round. So this week it does not get easier as the Tampa Bay Buccaneers' young secondary with Todd Bowles. Todd Bowles is a freaking genius, man, when it comes to secondary and cornerback play. And he's proven it again. Look at what they did last week against Michael Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders. They held them both to under 20 yards. I'm fading everyone in the second... all these guys. I'm fading DJ Moore. I'm fading Robbie Anderson. I am not interested in trying to deal with that. I think Teddy Bridgewater has a down week. I think Christian McCaffrey sees his volume increase a lot. I think Ian Thomas actually is probably the best sleeper of anybody. I think he can get you a solid day. I think he gets in the end zone in this one even. So I think that Ian Thomas is a rock-solid tight end, low-end tight end 1 for a stream. I think Christian McCaffrey is the one that dominates through the air. But I think Christian McCaffrey, too, had his worst 2 games last year versus this Tampa Bay Bucs defense. So overall, I'm really feeling Tampa Bay's defense in this one. I think they could shut down the Panthers' offense across the board. So I'm fading the receivers. Of course, you're starting Henry, starting McCaffrey. So then let's talk about the Bucs on the other side. So Carolina, they did not look great against the Raiders. I think really Ruggs kind of showed a little something before he got banged up. You know, obviously Darren Waller got his, but I think overall it was Josh Jacobs on the ground. So Ronald Jones, the question is he could continue to get that work. You have to take that risk and put him into your lineups because 19 touches last week, that is a big number, probably around 20. I think it was 19 or so. But my point is he had a productive day. He got the touches. So I think when you talk about Carolina and all the changes that Luke Kuechly's gone and Eric Reed is gone and James Bradbury's gone and this is a brand new defensive coordinator, new head coach, I think you got to roll with Ronald Jones because even if he gets you 15, he's going to get a productive day. I think he gets in the end zone in this one as well. As for Tom Brady, no Chris Godwin. Scotty Miller is on everyone's fantasy radar. I'm sure he's going to be good. He actually had a decent week last week. I think he's a pretty solid play. I think Mike Evans blows up. I think Mike Evans blows up. Get him in your DFS lineups. I think Mike Evans has a monster week after a slow week 1 against Marshawn Lattimore. I talked about that in my offseason article. I already expected a slow week. The injury didn't help, but he led the team in routes. So he was out there. I think he's ready. I think he blows up. No Chris Godwin. Get DFS. Mike Evans everywhere. Scotty Miller, I think he's okay. I think he's a solid wide receiver 3. As for the tight ends, I'm not buying it. O.J. Howard looks like it's a comeback, but he ran a route on less than 50% of Tom Brady's dropbacks. So that is a huge, that's not going to be sustainable throughout the year. You want to see more volume. You want to see more things, running routes. You want to see him out there a lot. He's not. So I think it's going to be very spotty when to start him. I think Mike Evans has a big week. I think Tom Brady is a whole, but I think really what we're going to see here is Ronald Jones, the ground game, maybe a little more Leonard Fournette sprinkled in. But you can't start Fournette until we see it happen on the field. All right, so 49ers versus the Jets. I think the real problem here is it's the strength versus strength. And I think really it's the Jets' dominant run defense versus the 49ers' dominant run offense. And I think the problem for me is that the 49ers are traveling from the West Coast to the East Coast for a 1 o'clock game. I've seen a lot of letdowns for that. I talked about that in the podcast when I was with the guys at TCK Pod, the Candlestick Kids. Love them. Skies, shout out to them. Those guys love them. But I think really from my standpoint, what I want to talk about here is there is opportunity. So let's talk about the 49ers. Obviously, you're probably going to start Raheem Mostert, but don't expect a big game on the ground. The Jets do. That's the one thing the Jets defense does very well is stop the run. Biggest vulnerability for the Jets, and we saw it last week, is outside corners. You know, both John Brown and Stephon Diggs had nice days. So the question is, who can we rely on? Mohamed Sanu, he might be like the biggest, craziest dart throw in fantasy for DFS, but you know, Kendrick Bourne. I mean, Kendrick Bourne is probably going to be a wide receiver 3 this week. The matchup is conducive of it. No George Kittle. I know a lot of people are excited about Jordan Reed. Probably rightfully so. I mean, listen, I'm personally starting Logan Thomas over Jordan Reed, but I think it makes a lot of sense. If you're a George Kittle owner, you can grab Jordan Reed. But I'm thinking it's probably going to be an ugly game. I think the Jets defense might be some weird, like a weird startable streamer defense this week. I think no one's going to see it coming. I think the Jets defense might be able to stop the 49ers' run game enough to make Jimmy G beat him, and then he doesn't have the weapons on the outside. Maybe Brandon Ayuk if he's healthy enough. I mean, it's a lot of question marks for me. I'm probably staying away from this from a DFS and fantasy standpoint. I think the Jets defense might be actually a play here in like a deeper dart throw if you're looking for a streamer D. On the other side with the Jets, I think Brashad Perriman is interesting because no Jamison Crowder, plus Richard Sherman is out on the outside. So maybe I'm looking at Brashad Perriman as a wide receiver 3 this week because of the fact that Richard Sherman, their best corner's out, no Jamison Crowder. Chris Herndon, keep him on your bench, but trust me, hold him. He's going to be awesome. I'm expecting big things from Chris Herndon this year. I love his usage last week. Problem with Chris Herndon, he wasn't running enough routes. He wasn't on the field enough, but he got targeted relentlessly when he was on the field. So as for the running backs, that's all I'm going to say. Don't even, maybe Josh Adams. Maybe get crazy. If you're in like a 16-team, crazy deep league, Josh Adams, maybe. I don't know why, but Frank Gore to me seems kind of, he's going to be okay. Maybe. Get you like 10 carries for, 45 yards. I could see that. But Josh Adams, to me, if you're going to take some weird crazy, just stay away. Don't bother. Anyway, so Broncos versus Steelers. Let's talk about the Broncos offense going up the Steelers defense. I'm pretty much hands off. Just because the Steelers defense has been so dominant. We saw what they did last week, pretty much shutting down Daniel Jones and company. It wasn't for that late drive in the fourth quarter down multiple scores. It looks a much worse day across the board. And their run defense is so dominant. Melvin Gordon, I understand it's a volume play. He could fall into the end zone. Just keep that in mind that you're not going to get the upside week from Melvin Gordon. He probably rushed for like 40 yards in this game. I'm not really excited for him at all. So I think from that Broncos standpoint, offensively, you're probably staying away from everybody, even Noah Fant. I'm not feeling it. I think last week was just kind of a matchup dependent. He got in the end zone, great, but I'm just not feeling Noah Fant either this week. I think the Steelers defense, of course, you're rolling with them. Now, as the Steelers Steelers offense versus the Broncos defense, let's take a look at how they were beat last week against the Titans. So the Titans, Derrick Henry, obviously on the ground. The Broncos held their own. So, I mean, it might not be the best week for James Conner and or Benny Snell because the Denver defense was okay on the ground. It's like through the air. How can you beat them? We saw Corey Davis have a nice week against these outside corners. A.J. Brown had a little bit slower week, but the point is A.J. Boye, who was their #1 corner, is now out. So I think pretty much everybody in the Steelers offense is hands-on. I think you can go with Deontay Johnson this week without A.J. Boye. I think you definitely roll, of course, with Juju. I think Big Ben at home is a great play, even in a tougher matchup against this Broncos defense. As for the tight ends, I want to see it first. I get it. I understand Eric Ebron can score a touchdown, but like until I can see some type of statistical data to back up when to play a guy like Eric Ebron, I'm hands off with him. But I think you can start Juju. I think you can start Deontay Johnson. I think you can start Big Ben. I think for the running backs, I want to see it first personally. And on the Broncos side, pretty much hands off. All right, Jags, Titans. And this one's kind of exciting. Gardner Minshew showed some things last week. I think from a Jaguars offensive standpoint, let's talk about how the Titans were beat by the Broncos. Jerry Jeudy had some plays. He did make some drops, but he was able to get open on the outside. Of course, right now today, the Titans are actually dealing with 2 injuries. Dory Jackson is out, and Malcolm Butler, their other outside corner, could be out as well. So this could be a nice day for DJ Chark and Gardner Minshew with the 2 key corners being out for the Titans. Now, a guy that I want to talk about that I think is a big-time sleeper is Keelan Cole. Now, Keelan Cole, a couple of years ago, he was a fantasy darling, and then he kind of fell out of favor. Well, the thing that I thought was notable is D.D. Westbrook is actually a healthy scratch. He was actually a healthy scratch last week. Keelan Cole became the slot guy. He actually was second on the team in routes, second on the team in targets. And now with the fact that we thought maybe Tyler Eifert could be a thing, we have seen in the past Jay Gruden feature a slot receiver with Jamison Crowder. So don't put it past you. If you have deeper league, if you're looking for a flyer, Keelan Cole is that guy. I do like Keelan Cole as the number 2, ahead of Lucas Chenault. I like him a lot. So just someone to keep in mind. So we're starting DJ Chark. We might give a look and a bench stash to Keelan Cole. Chenault, for me, he got in the end zone. That's great. But other than that, it's like I'm not going to rely on a touchdown each week from a number 3 wide receiver in a routes and target perspective on an offense led by Gardner Minshew. Sorry. Gardner Minshew, I think he's a decent play. Honestly, I would consider him in a 12 team as a QB1 this week. We saw some good things from Drew Lock, kind of. I mean, he was able to beat them a little bit last week, but I think, DJ Chark to me is the play amongst all these guys. As for James Robinson, 3.9 yards per carry, I get that. His success rate was okay, according to Warren Sharp. He looked decent. Obviously, when you talk about the Jags going up against the Indianapolis Colts, the Colts don't have some intimidating run defense. So I want to see him do it consistently before I recommend him as a start. I still think he's a bench stash, but I'm not starting James Robinson just yet, but he is a hold. As for the, let's talk about the Titans versus the Jags. So where they get beat. So last week, obviously, Marlon Mack started looking pretty good against this Jag run defense. I think Derrick Henry is just going to oh my God. Derrick Henry is going to kill him. So I think that's going to be a huge part to why Tannehill might not have the volume. But someone I want to talk about is obviously Corey Davis with A.J. Brown being out. But the thing is, last week, the guys that got controlled were T.Y. Hilton. We had a slower day against the young cornerback C.J. Henderson and company. I think the guy who really dominated was Paris Campbell. So I think from a PPR perspective, I think Adam Humphries could have a nice day from a PPR game. I think he's going to get you probably 5-6 catches, and he might be able to find the end zone. So I think from a PPR standpoint, I like Adam Humphries. Corey Davis might have a little bit of a slower day, but I think this is Derrick Henry's game. He's just going to dominate on the ground. So you're really banking on that. And then Jonnu Smith, obviously Jack Doyle won. He was banged up last week. Now he's out. So I think that's key. But he had 3 for 49. I think Jonnu Smith is okay. I'm a little wary about Jonnu because he doesn't dominate tight end touches. He doesn't dominate tight end routes. He only ran 4 more routes than Anthony Firksner. So I think from that standpoint, you can start him as a low-end tight end 1. I think he's a good bet for a decent amount of targets with Ryan Tannehill. But Tannehill threw a lot last week. So there's a volume problem for this team because we're not expecting him to throw that much every week. But A.J. Brown kind of being out cancels that out. So I'm okay with starting obviously Derrick Henry, but Adam Humphries, PPR, Corey Davis, I don't think he's a little uninspiring in my view. I don't think he's going to be a huge get this week because of Derrick Henry, but I think he's okay. But I would take Humphries in a PPR. Call me crazy, but I think that's true. And then Jonnu Smith to start as a low end tight end 1. All right, Lions Packers. So the thing about the Packers and the Lions game is that we have good data. It's a division game. I like that. We know what these teams are. I'm a little worried about Matthew Stafford. So Stafford on the road in Lambeau last year did not look great. And now he has no Kenny Golladay. So I'm not feeling this passing game. Marvin Jones should see a lot of Jair Alexander, so I'm fading Marvin Jones. I think the guy from the Lions standpoint you want to look at is Danny Amendola. I think the thing of the Packers last week did get beat up by Adam Thielen. I think that's a positive thing for Danny Amendola, who had 80 yards receiving last week in the game versus the Chicago Bears. So let's do it. Let's do some Danny Amendola. I like it. So do some Danny Amendola. T.J. Hawkinson obviously is still a play. We saw last week that versus versus the Packers faced. Oh my God, I'm losing my train of thought. Packers faced the Vikings. There is no wow. All right, let's chat about T.J. Hawkinson. So with Hawkinson, last week we saw there was no Vikings tight end that was really notable. That is a little concerning from T.J. Hawkinson, but I think you got to keep rolling with him. Obviously, with no Kenny Golladay and with Marvin Jones maybe being limited by their Packers top corner, you got to roll the dice on T.J. Hawkinson. I do like him as a start this week, along with Amendola. And then on the ground game, Adrian Peterson should have success on the ground. The worry for everybody is the game flow as the Packers are at home. Aaron Rodgers looks to be back to his elite form. I'm a little concerned because the Lions are also going to be down 2 corners. So I think from that standpoint, Adrian Peterson's going to have to get it done early. I think he's going to look good in his limited touches. But the question is, do you think he's going to get in the end zone? And I'm not sure if that's the case. I don't see him getting up to 15 to 20 touches because this game could get out of hand. That means DeAndre Swift. So Swift dropped a touchdown last week. He scored on another one. I like Swift. I think Swift in a PPR league is a start. I think he's one of my favorite player props of the week at 2.5 receptions. So give that a look if you're in New Jersey or whatever. And you can gamble a little bit on FanDuel Sportsbook. Give that a shot. And then finally, from the other side, the Packers, it seems like it's all systems go. From a number 2 wide receiver standpoint, Allen Lazard versus MVS. Lazard got the routes, MVS got the targets and production. So I think we have to see one more week to see how we're going to truly feel. Both guys are bench stashes because there is no pass-catching tight end. Good thing about the wide receivers is there's no true threat at the tight end position. So I think from that standpoint, you're rolling with Adams, you're rolling with Aaron Rodgers. You could probably play both MVS and Lazard, but just keep in mind that that is not clear yet. Lazard got 4 receptions for 64 yards and a touchdown on a day Rodgers threw over 350 and 4. So, call me skeptical, but that Rodgers is going to be good this week, but that's a lot of production to get so little a piece of the pie. Doesn't seem like it's a good long-term thing. As for the running backs, obviously you're going to start Aaron Jones. I think, listen, the matchup's good for him. He's going to look awesome this week on the ground. The Lions did not look too great in their limited work against David Montgomery last week. Montgomery still had a pretty solid day from just pure carry standpoint. So I think that Aaron Jones, very good. Once again, one of the best bets of the week to score a touchdown. So I'm rolling with Aaron Jones, of course. All right, Dolphins and Bills. So, Bills in the Dolphins game for Buffalo, we saw Cam Newton last week dominate on the ground. So I think Josh Allen could have a nice day running the football against this team. But it was interesting. They had the Patriots had the lowest dropbacks in the NFL last week. The Bills had the second most. So the Bills, the problem when you view the Bills' offense is that their offensive volume last week is not sustainable. They are not going to throw that much. They are not going to drop back that much. And when you look at the actual finishes for these guys, they were good. I mean, Diggs, 8 catches, 80-something yards. John Brown in the 70-yard range. Cole Beasley had a bunch of targets. Zach Moss was involved. Problem is, no one really blew up in the sense of what you would expect with the volume that Josh Allen had to throw with. So I'm a little concerned this week from a pass volume standpoint. It's going to be less than what we expected, than what we saw. So I think the Dolphins did a very good job on the outside. The problem is when you're looking at these matchups, who's the primary outside threat for the Patriots versus the Dolphins? So is it Byron Jones? Is it Xavier Howard's dominance on the outside that made Edelman look okay and Cam Newton had to run more? I don't know, but I just think that this week I want to see Diggs and John Brown do it versus a tougher matchup than what they saw against the Jets secondary, which they don't have anybody on the outside. As for the tight end, don't bother. Running backs is a little interesting. They should be able to get much more success on the ground. I'm talking much more success. I mean, the Bills last week, from the ground game perspective, outside of Josh Allen, no one could get it done. I think this week you're going to see a much more productive day for Zach Moss and Devin Singletary. The problem is who's getting what touches. I think Zach Moss clearly is the goal line back. That's the more premier guy. I think when you're looking at these situations, you have to say to yourself, all right, who's going to get me the best chance to score? That's going to be Zach Moss. Devin Singletary, to me, I cannot trust him. I won't be able to ever trust him. This offense is very exotic in their ways. They get everybody involved, but there's no one true running back on this team that I trust. But I'm going to lean Zach Moss's way. So if you're starting a running back this week in that backfield, I would take Moss because I think he's a bigger threat, better threat to score. Miami, Fitzpatricking, Fitzpatricking. 3 interceptions last week, and Tua time is going to come. That's the biggest problem season long. I love Devontae Parker. Parker actually looked pretty solid in the first half last week, but we saw what I was worried about is that he's no longer going to get 12 targets a week with Preston Williams back. And also Chan Gailey's history with dropbacks, they're not going to throw as much as they did last year. So what does that mean? I think Parker, to me this week, he's limited. I'm staying away from Parker, unfortunately. I have to see him look healthy and finish a game. Hamstring injuries could happen at any time during the game, re-aggravations, plus he has Tre'Davious White, plus he has the Bills. Unfortunately, you're fading pretty much everyone in the pass-catching core in this matchup again, and I'm a little worried that this is going to be like a low-scoring game. Maybe the Dolphins are even more keep this game close on the defensive side, and we see a lower-scoring game. I'm not excited about starting anybody, unfortunately, because of this. And if Parker was healthy, I would say start him in a heartbeat. But after this week, we could see Tua. I mean, honestly, we could. If they go 0-2 and, they play the Jags in week 3, I also want to keep in mind, Gesicki had some good usage in the slot. It was expected. But his schedule opens up a little bit after this week. So just be aware, somebody might drop Mike Gesicki in your league. He might be a streamable asset against the Jags in week 3. As for the running backs, I just don't know. I don't know. So, Jordan Howard got the touchdown, but he aggravated his hamstring. Myles Gaskin's involved. Laird, are you kidding me? 4 running backs in the Dolphins' backfield? Until we get clarity, I'm not interested in rostering anybody, to be honest with you. Open up a bench spot for someone like that. I'd rather have Keelan Cole than any Dolphins running back. All right, Colts versus the Vikings. This one's going to be a quiet shootout, I think. I like it. So last week let's talk about the Vikings offense first versus the Colts defense. We saw Gardner Minshew have some success last week. We saw the ground game get a little success against them with James Robinson. So that's actually exciting to me for Kirk Cousins and company playing against this Colts defense at home. I think the Colts defense is not they're like a bend not break defense where they don't allow many big plays. So I think Adam Thielen's a slam dunk. He's one of my guys from this summer. I love Adam Thielen. You're going to start him every game. The number 2 wide receiver is interesting. So last week, Kirk Cousins only dropped back about 31 times. So we're going to expect a little more pass volume. And from that case, I'm thinking that all right, let's talk about the Vikings versus... Let's talk about the Vikings versus the... All right, next game we're talking about Vikings versus the Colts. Now, the biggest thing about this game is both... I think this could be a secret shootout. I think this could be a big game for each offense because of what's going on with the secondary for the Vikings. But also we saw Gardner Minshew have some success versus the Colts. So let's talk about the Vikings first. I think it's pretty obvious you're starting Adam Thielen. The question is, who's the number 2? Now, Justin Jefferson did get more routes than Bisbee Johnson, but Bisbee Johnson got the targets, and the production. I think Bisbee Johnson, to me, is a sleeper in this game. We saw Keelan Cole score. Keelan Cole, the primary slot guy. We saw Lucas Chenault score in that game, so the backup receivers, number 2s and 3s, had some success. I think Bisbee Johnson is a sleeper, deep wide receiver 3 in this matchup. As for the tight ends, they're pretty much hands-off. I don't even know what's going on with Irv Smith and Kyle Rudolph. So I think, really, to be honest with you, the guy I want in this offense is to be Bisbee Johnson. But might be another game we see the rookie finally take over. But until I see it, my pick is Bisbee behind Adam Thielen. Running back, smash, Dalvin Cook, press play. Just do it. On the other side, Colts, I think Phillip Rivers was sloppy. But the thing is, I don't care from a fantasy perspective. Vikings defense got lit up by Aaron Rodgers. So I think Phillip Rivers, Paris Campbell, T.Y. Hilton, fire him up. I think the thing about Phillip Rivers that I'm interested in is that there is no Jack Doyle. So there is no pass-catching tight end. Mo Ali Cox is going to be that guy. I'm not really convinced about that. So I think Paris Campbell, I think T.Y. Hilton have big games in this one. Great PPR plays. I think even in standard format, T.Y. Hilton's going to have a monster day. I think for running backs, I'm playing both Hines. I'm playing Taylor. I think Taylor could have a monster game in this matchup. So I'm playing Taylor. I'm playing Hines. I'm playing Paris Campbell. I'm playing T.Y. Hilton. Phillip Rivers, he's okay. If you're desperate, I don't know why, but if you're desperate in a 10, 12-team league, you want to play him, you can. But I actually don't think Rivers needs to have a big game for those guys to play well. So just thinking about that. All right, Cardinals versus the Washington football team. So I should take my victory lap now for Logan Thomas. Logan Thomas, my boy, I love it. Logan Thomas is awesome. I love him. I have him in every league. I think Logan Thomas has a nice day. I think Logan Thomas is now the new Darren Waller this year. I'm pretty excited to see this go down. I think the Cardinals have not shown us anything. George Kittle was dominating them before he got hurt in the first half last week. I think Arizona is still vulnerable to tight ends. I think you're playing him. The reason why I love Logan Thomas even more is that Terry McLaurin's going to see Patrick Peterson. And there's a little bit of conflict with Patrick Peterson. Is he still elite? Listen, he held Odell Beckham to 8 for 66 in the game last year. He held DK Metcalf to 0 for 0. He held Robert Woods under 70 yards, but Woods got in the end zone. Listen, Terry McLaurin's still great. I know that, but last week we saw him against Darius Slay. He had a modest day. I think if you want 9 points, 9.5 points, he's going to give it to you. I really do think Terry McLaurin is a fantastic player. I just traded for him. But I think the buy low window for Terry McLaurin is next week. Go get him next week. I think he's going to have another modest day, maybe like 9 points in fantasy and half-point PPR. He's not going to win you the week. You're not going to lose it. Just go for the gusto. I think you can sit Terry McLaurin. I don't see him having a monster day. I think Logan Thomas is going to have the biggest day of anybody. On the ground game side, all right, so Antonio Gibson lost goal line work to Peyton Barber. That is a little discouraging. But at the same time, I talked about how this backfield with Adrian Peterson originally could look like Jonathan Stewart and Christian McCaffrey 2017, the poor man version of it. That's exactly what's happening. Peyton Barber is the Jonathan Stewart and Antonio Gibson's Christian McCaffrey. Just enjoy the ride. I think he's going to be fun to watch. Eagles defense was much better. I think that defense is going to be much improved. But I think the problem is for the Cardinals, they have good corners. They do have decent. Drake Kirkpatrick's now there. Byron Murphy is one of their young corners behind Patrick Peterson. So I think Antonio Gibson can do some things in the pass game in this one. So I gotta check that player prop. I'm gonna take a look. So I think Antonio Gibson has some good receptions, a good game from a PPR perspective in this matchup. As for the Cardinals, I think you're set with DeAndre Hopkins. I don't think we're worried about him. That was awesome. Awesome game, awesome usage. The question is Christian Kirk. You don't go one with no receptions and say, all right, start the guy. But I think this week is very telling if you're going to keep or cut him. So keep Christian Kirk on your bench. Let him show you something on your bench. But I would not play him in this matchup. Washington's front is just nasty. They were just dominant. Obviously, the Eagles didn't have Lane Johnson. That's a huge caveat. But this Washington front is very, very good. And I think that's going to be a problem for Kenyon Drake running the football. I think it's going to be a problem for Kyler Murray scrambling around. I think the Washington defense could be an interesting streamer defense this week, especially because of the fact that Kyler Murray does take sacks. And I think that last year we saw that. And I think with Kenyon Drake, you're starting Kenyon Drake. I think you temper expectations, but unfortunately, you got to start the guy because he's a stud. I think DeAndre Hopkins, I mean, I'm not stupid. I'm not going to tell you sim. I think Kyler Murray, I think he's going to be okay, but I don't think he's going to be a top 10 QB this week. So I think if you have other options to pivot to, like I guess I would say Aaron Rodgers, but probably not. But if you do have a question about who to start over Kyler Murray, you let me know and I'll talk to you about it. All right, Ravens Texans. So Ravens last week, obviously they're steamrolling people. They're steamrolling Cleveland. They did it last year against the Texans, and there's nothing about the Texans' defense that's brand new and fresh and exciting, and there's no new defensive coordinator. It's the same shit. So I think really for me, when I'm looking at this game, I'm thinking, you know what? Roll with it. I think you stay with it. Mark Ingram's the biggest question mark. So this is the thing. Mark Ingram last week, they say Dobbins is the goal line back. That's not what happened. So the first drive of the game, they got down to the 6-yard line. Ingram got a carry. Then they scored in the next play with a touchdown pass to Mark Andrews. The next time they were in the game, the next time this happened, they drove down the field. Ingram was in the whole time. Ingram came out for a breather. Then they threw the ball to Willie Snead. He goes all the way down to the goal line with Dobbins in. They kept Dobbins in. He scored. So there's context to this whole situation. It was just the product of bad circumstances. Ingram had a pretty solid day through the air versus this team last year. Had 2 touchdowns through the air. I think Mark Ingram is probably going to be the surprising play of the week. I think Mark Ingram stays in your lineups. Play Mark Ingram. He's going to have success against this defense. I think it was just bad luck last week versus the Cleveland Browns. So I'm rolling with Mark Ingram. I think he's okay. For Dobbins, I almost think it was dumb luck. But I could be wrong. This could be one you have to take on the chin. But I think Ingram's the guy this week. I think he has the bigger week than Dobbins. I think he even gets you a goal line carry. Let's call that. Put it in the bank. Cash it. So on the receiver side, Marquise Hollywood Brown. We saw actually the Texans do have some young, interesting corners. They actually are playing interesting with Roby and Vernon Hargraves. I think those guys are decent. I think the one thing I will say is that Tyreek Hill got his last week. I think Brown's going to get his. I think Brown's player prop is actually pretty interesting. I think it's 3.5 for the week. I think I would take Brown's over on that. I think Marquise Brown is a start. I think Mark Andrews. We don't have to tell you. Mark Andrews and Lamar Jackson. Just play them. They're awesome. They're great. Houston side, Will Fuller versus Baltimore. I think it's going to have to be a volume thing. You got to almost pray they get blown out because last year DeAndre Hopkins had a decent day, but he has no upside. So it took 12 targets for DeAndre Hopkins to get 7 receptions, about 80 yards. I think Will Fuller could do something along those lines, but he's not DeAndre Hopkins. So what are you looking at, 5 for 60? That's no upside to me. So I'm not really excited to start Will Fuller. Give me somebody that can get me a big week. I don't think Will Fuller is going to get you a big week in this one. I think Deshaun Watson is probably going. He got garbage time last week against KC. I think it's going to have to be the same thing with Deshaun Watson. You play Deshaun Watson, but at the same time, I don't think he has elite upside in these matchups anymore. I don't think you're starting Cooks. The one thing I will say from the ground game, David Johnson did look pretty good, but Duke Johnson got hurt. So David Johnson started monopolizing touches in the second half. That's not going to happen this week. Duke Johnson was splitting work. They almost used them the same. It was like David Johnson, Duke Johnson in the first game. It looked like they were kind of both doing the same thing in the first half. Second half, Duke goes down, David gets more work. So maybe I'm bitter, but I think David Johnson, look at what the Baltimore defense did. Well, Baltimore's defense actually did get beat up a little bit by the Browns on the ground. It was just the game flow that killed them. So maybe David Johnson's fine. I think you're starting David Johnson as an RB2, but call me skeptical on this one. The jury's still out, maybe even a sell high candidate. As for the tight end, I just want to talk about this. Jordan Akins actually ran a bunch of routes last week. He actually ran a route. He was actually one of the top 10 on a route percentage versus team dropbacks. I think that's notable. This offense has used tight ends. They've been trying to use a pass-catching tight end for a long time. We saw Fells last year had some big games in sense of touchdowns. So I think Akins is someone to monitor. If he has a decent game against this team, he might be someone you can pick up and stream this week, especially if you're struggling at tight end. All right. Chiefs and the Chargers. So Chiefs-Chargers game. KC. This is interesting. So Patrick Mahomes typically gets his. Tyreek Hill has not played well versus the Chargers the last 2 full games he's faced them. Tyreek Hill I'm a little concerned about. Travis Kelce's going to get his. No Derwin James. I think Travis Kelce's obviously a slam dunk. I think, of course, Clyde Edwards-Helaire is just going to – he's awesome. Good for Clyde. I think he's going to be awesome this week. I think Patrick Mahomes is going to figure out a way for Sammy Watkins and Robinson and Hardman. With all this stuff, he's just always so good. I think it's just notable that Hill – he has not been great versus the Chargers the last 2 full games. So I think if you're playing Hill because he offers you upside, but at the same time, maybe you play a flex play that's a boom because I don't think Hill's going to have a monster game in this matchup. On the other side for the Chargers, what a disappointment. Eckler wasn't used in the pass game. I was a little worried, and I talked about this in the offseason. So Anthony Lynn wants to start a new offense. When he came over from Buffalo to take the head coaching job, he took on a CEO role. He kept Ken Wisenhunt on the staff. So Ken Wisenhunt got to keep his offense. Anthony Lynn was fed up with it. He fired Ken Wisenhunt. He installed his offense. So this is the offense that Tyrod ran in Buffalo, not the same offense that Phillip Rivers ran for years. And the first thing I noticed is that the passing game usage for the running backs went way down, and Eckler showed it last week. Eckler looked great on the ground. I think Eckler has a big game on the ground. I think Eckler is still a start. I think he's going to get you a solid rushing game in this matchup. KC's run defense is nothing. It's never been good. So I think Eckler is going to be on the ground. I think I'm worried about him, though, from a passing game perspective. As for the receiving core, it was Hunter Henry who had the big game last week. But when you look at who beat KC, it was not really anybody. So it was Will Fuller had a nice day. So I think maybe Keenan Allen can play pretty well. But the thing is, the Kansas City Chiefs secondary has been very good against wide receivers dating back to last year. So I'm not really high on Allen. I'm not interested in Mike Williams. Hunter Henry is okay. I think we saw Akins get in the end zone last week. So I think Hunter Henry is probably still the best play this week. But I think Eckler is still a start. But Tyrod Taylor, he's got to run. I'm sorry. He did not run. I watched that game. I actually had a player prop on his. I lost one of my player props last week because I thought Tyrod would run. He did not run. And that's a big part of his game. He thinks he's going to be like Aaron Rodgers back there. Stop. PSA, run the football. You'll do good things for your offense. They need to use Tyrod's legs to their advantage. They did not do it in week 1. They better start doing it or it's going to be problems for this offense moving forward. All right, Sunday night, Patriots-Seahawks. Now, the biggest thing is with this team is the outside receivers. So let's talk about the Patriots first. Last week, they had the lowest dropbacks in the NFL. Lower than everybody. 17 less than I projected in my thing. And I could be wrong, but that's a low amount of dropbacks. Julian Edelman had a 31.5% target share. That's good news. I think Julian Edelman is a start. I think he's a great start of the week. Because we saw last week Russell Gage in the slot beat up this Seattle Seahawks secondary. I think Julian Edelman has a very nice day in this game. N'Keal Harry, obviously, it would be nice to see it, but we got to see him do it first. Ryan Izzo is the starting tight end on this offense. He ran a lot of routes last week. Believe it or not, Ryan Izzo ran a lot of routes this week compared to the dropbacks. So I'm just saying, like, Seattle is improved. You're not playing Ryan Izzo at all, obviously, but just don't be surprised. If you see his name pop up a little bit, maybe a 4 for 50 or a 3 for something, whatever, 3 for 50, and you start seeing a little production, don't be surprised. He is going to be the starter. We saw Cam rely on Greg Olsen for years. I know, I've seen crazier things happen, right? So the running backs. Obviously, I think Sony Michel is actually he's a decent play. He's a good play for a touchdown. He did get the goal line work. I think that's always positive. He did get 10 carries. But the thing is, Cam Newton ran so much last week that they didn't really need Sony Michel to be a good runner. Player prop, though, he is at 34.5 rushing yards on DraftKings. I like the over for him. We saw on the ground Todd Gurley have some success against the Seattle Seahawks. I think they still have success on the ground this week. I think Cam Newton running is good. But the thing about Cam Newton's running is that the Seattle Seahawks play a lot of zone. The Miami Dolphins, who they played last week, play a lot of man. So that's better for mobile quarterbacks to face man than zone. So I think Cam Newton's not going to have as much success on the ground. I think that's better news for Sony Michel. I think Sony has a good day on the ground, but the problem is his volume. So he could be like 10 for 50, and that's nothing for fantasy. So Doomsday, it's a boomer, it's a touchdown or bust, but he's a good bet for a touchdown in this game. I think Cam Newton throws more. I think Edelman's a start. And I think outside of that, you're not starting any receivers just yet. For the Seattle Seahawks, now, I'm worried about DK. I'm sitting DK. DK has not proven anything yet when it comes to shadow coverage. Last week, he got shut out for 0 points versus Patrick Peterson. Now he's got to face Stephon Gilmore. Not interested. Sit DK Metcalf. Tyler Lockett is interesting to me because of playing in the slot. I think that he could still have a productive day, but you're going to see a lot of them keying on him with multiple J.C. Jackson and probably maybe even bracketing over Tyler Lockett. They're going to expect Russell Wilson to beat him. You know who's a sleeper? Greg Olsen. Greg Olsen is a sleeper this week. Actually, now I'm thinking about it, I might even consider starting him as one of my DraftKings lineup or something because he is a sleeper. They're going to make sure, they're not going to let these receivers beat them. Bill Belichick will not do that. However, Chris Carson could beat them on the ground. So I think, interestingly enough, we didn't see it with Miami. It's a bad example, but I think the ground game it's going to have to spearhead this offense this week. Chris Carson, Carlos Hyde. So I think I like those guys in this matchup. I like Greg Olsen as a sleeper tight end for this week. I think Tyler Lockett's still a start. I'm sitting DK Metcalf. For Russell, I just don't see it. I think this week I would sit him if you can pivot to somebody else. Sorry I don't have anybody off my top of my head, but like I said, if you want to talk to me about streamers, you want to DM me and ask me who to start, let me know. We'll talk about it for options. Monday night game is the Saints versus the Raiders. This is a cool one. Obviously, Michael Thomas over the Saints. Michael Thomas is out. I think Jared Cook has a revenge game. I think Jared Cook might be my starter of the week at the tight end because he's got a revenge game against the Raiders. You want to choose Darren Waller over me? I got you. No Michael Thomas, I'm in. Emmanuel Sanders, start him, flex spot. I think the Raiders showed last week that they got beat by Robbie Anderson. I think you can definitely beat this team. I think Emmanuel Sanders is the logical guy to step in. Traquan Smith, I think you're getting cute. Honestly, there is no statistic to say that they're going to have a big week, but maybe because Traquan Smith is more like a Robbie Anderson and Emmanuel Sanders more like DJ Moore, hey, there's your rationale. You can throw a dart throw on Traquan, but I'm not doing it. I think Emmanuel Sanders is the play. Jared Cook's probably my favorite one of all. Alvin Kamara, just let him eat. Let him eat, baby. Alvin Kamara is going to eat this week, of course. Drew Brees, I'm not really interested in playing Drew Brees on the road without Michael Thomas. So I'm fading Drew Brees this week. On the other side, the Raiders, listen, the Saints defense is no joke. They're no joke. I mean, the ground defense, their run defense is stout. They have 2 elite corners on the outside. This is not going to be easy peasy like it was for the Raiders last week against that Panthers off defense. So I'm worried about the receivers. I am not playing Derek Carr. I think Josh Jacobs is going to have a much tougher time on the ground this week. But Josh Jacobs, of course, tip the cap. He's a stud. You're starting him. Derek Carr, receivers, fading him. I think really Darren Waller is going to be the guy who's going to be successful. I think the way to beat the Saints is going to be with a tight end because Lattimore and Janoris Jenkins on the outside is not going to let Henry Ruggs and Brian Edwards beat them. I think you're going to have to beat them in the slot. You know, I'm going to do it live. I'm doing it live right now. I'm gonna see right now who got the most slot routes for the Raiders last week because I think that person, if we're doing like a one-night slate on DFS, I think I kind of want that guy. And that's going to be, drum roll please, let's see. Wow, Henry Ruggs, 13. Hunter Renfrow, 11. Hey, good for Ruggs. David Ruggs gets some work on the inside. Okay, I stand corrected. I tip my cap to myself. Live, correcting your mistakes. That's what life's all about. So that's really it for the week, guys. I think this week is going to be exciting stuff. Please go check out my articles on Razzball.com with the shadow coverage report. Expand the box score. You can check out my opportunity analysis. These are very important to understanding where to start to sit, where to fade guys, maybe even try to buy low on players. I love it. Go follow me on Instagram at Fantasy Football X Factor, on Twitter at FFXFactor. This is Bobby Lamarco. Thanks for joining me again, guys, and we'll talk again soon.